The Japanese Invasion of Manchuria and the Rape of Nanking, the history of the most notorious events of the Second Sino-Japanese War by Charles River editors, narrated by Colin Fluxman. Chapter 1. Manchuria before the invasion. Manchuria, and indeed China as a whole, swarmed with bandit chieftains, and warlords during the 1920s. Among them, Zhang Zuolin emerged as one of the most successful of these in Manchuria, and indeed enjoyed such success that he soon contemplated seizing the entirety of China. Zhang Zuolin initially worked with the Japanese, having persuaded them in 1903 to spare his life in exchange for his cooperation after they captured him. By 1912, Zhang Zuolin had established himself as the warlord of Mukden, an important Manchurian city and later the scene of Japan's invasion of Manchuria. Though in many ways a typical warlord, Zhang worked to develop Manchurian industries, especially those under Chinese control. He balanced this with efforts to appease the Japanese, securing their temporary support as he extended his dominion over the entire region. Initially, Manchuria prospered under the moustached, smooth-faced Zhang, and this prosperity in turn gave the former bandit and Chinese bannerman the money he needed to arm and equip ever larger military forces. Like a fungal infection, ambition spread throughout Zhang's system as he contemplated ever more grandiose projects. As his spending finally outstripped Manchuria's considerable resources, the warlord turned to the old method of opium sales to fund his projects. As that was going on from 1919 to 1922, the Japanese attempted to use the brutal Russian Civil War as an opportunity to seize North Manchuria and, in fact, take portions of Russian territory proper. The Americans and several other nations briefly entered the Russian Civil War, fighting against the Bolsheviks on behalf of the White Russians, but these nations soon withdrew, however, and the Japanese fought on alone. As the 1920s passed, the civilian government of Japan and the Imperial Japanese Army, IJA, jockeyed for power. As time went on, the civilians got the worst of the struggle. The IJA occasionally managed to maneuver a military man into the premiership, at which times their power naturally expanded. Assassination of civilian premiers who opposed them grew into a more frequent and more effective tool of the Japanese military as the ambitious generals and admirals came to dominate Japan's future policy. By 1931, the IJA represented an extremely powerful state within a state. Unlike the situation in Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia, where the military elements completely took over the government, the Japanese army never fully replaced the civilian administration. Instead, the military mushroomed into the dominant partner in a badly dysfunctional relationship, forcing the civilian administration to do the heavy lifting of keeping the nation functional, while co-opting the national resources for ever more grandiose empire-building projects on mainland Asia. Civilian administrators who protested or obstructed the IJA's high-handed militaristic policy often met their fate from a bullet, knife, or samurai sword delivered by the hands of a convenient ultranationalist. Though the civilian government grew progressively more helpless to resist their violent army puppet masters, they still managed occasional, futile attempts at pushback against the IJA's dictates. Manchuria represented a resource base in which the army operated as the majority investor and owner. The South Manchurian Railway Company, in particular, proved both a cash cow for the IJA and a method of increasing the army's influence in one of Japan's most important economic regions. All other business activity in the area depended heavily on the railroad, especially the many enterprises involved in export. With such strong interests in Manchuria, the Japanese grew alarmed when Chiang Kai-shek established his capital at the northern city of Nanking in 1928. Escalating tensions, the Japanese moved army units into Shantung province in that year, creating a blocking force capable of delaying any northward move by Chiang into Manchuria. Even more threatening, perhaps, from the army's perspective, the Chinese began building their own railroad lines into Manchuria in 1928 and 1929. The Kwantung Army's monopoly, secured via their ownership of the South Manchurian Railway Company, came under threat from these activities. Local Japanese businessmen, seeing their profits or even livelihood threatened by Chinese competition, pressured their government to take a hard line towards Manchuria. With the selection of Tanaka Giichi
Sample complete. Ready to continue?